In their final moments, when fame no longer mattered, these legendary stars spoke truths they'd hidden for a lifetime. This is what Hollywood's brightest icons confessed, only minutes before death. 12. Joan Crawford. In her final hours, Joan Crawford, once the unshakable queen of MGM, lay weak and silent in her Manhattan apartment. Cancer had stripped away the power that once made her terrifying to assistants and adored by millions. When her housekeeper knelt beside her bed to pray, Joan rasped, "Don't you dare ask God to help me." Those were her last known words, but what came before that was her true confession. According to those close to her, Joan had begun speaking openly about the guilt that haunted her, the broken marriages, the estranged children, and the image she'd spent her whole life maintaining. She told a friend, "I've lived as two people, the woman on the screen and the one who cries alone afterward." Crawford admitted she was terrified of dying forgotten, that the world would only remember the mask, not the human underneath. Her obsession with control had made her a legend, but also her prisoner. She confessed that she had hurt people in the name of perfection, and that she would trade all of it for peace. Hours later, she died in bed alone, makeup removed, mirrors covered. The woman who once demanded worship from Hollywood left this world on her own terms, without prayer, without mercy, but with truth. 11. Clark Gable. Clark Gable's final moments were a brutal contrast to the man the world thought he was. The king of Hollywood, the confident Rhett Butler who could charm anyone, spent his last hours trembling, weak, and full of regret. After years of chasing fame, women, and distraction, he could no longer hide the ghost that had followed him for decades: the loss of his wife, Carol Lombard. In the hospital, as his heart failed, Gable made a quiet confession to a nurse who had grown fond of him. He told her, "I never forgave myself for letting her go that night." He meant the night Carol boarded the plane that crashed in 1942. To the world, he was strong, stoic, unbreakable. But inside, he carried a grief so deep it never healed. "I should have gone with her," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "I should have stopped her." He admitted he had been acting his whole life not in films, but in reality. The macho image was a shield, hiding guilt and loneliness. When the nurse told him to rest, he smiled faintly and said, "Soon, I'll see her soon." Those were his last words. He died days later, finally free from the role he never wanted to play, a man pretending he didn't miss her every single day. 10. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's death wasn't sudden. It was a long, painful fade-out. By 1969, the once radiant girl from The Wizard of Oz was exhausted, broke, and emotionally destroyed. But even in her final night in London, she wasn't angry, just tired of pretending. Before her overdose, she looked at her husband and said softly, "I tried to be somebody they wanted." That single line summed up her entire life. As a child star, she'd been forced into impossible diets, sleeping pills, and studio control. MGM treated her like a product, not a person. She once said, "They took my childhood and sold it for a song." In her final hours, Judy spoke about how she never truly lived as herself. Every smile, every laugh, every performance was scripted by others. Those close to her recalled how her eyes looked peaceful, as if she had finally stopped fighting an invisible war. She confessed that fame had become her cage, that love had always felt like a performance too. "I wasn't born to make people happy," she whispered. "I was born to feel, and they wouldn't let me." When her body was found hours later, the newspapers called it an accident. But Judy's final confession proved it wasn't. It was a release from the lights, the pressure, and the endless applause that never filled the silence afterward. 9. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn's death was just as dramatic as his life. The swashbuckling hero who lived like a storm finally faced the calm he had always run from. At 50, his body was wrecked, heart failing, liver gone, face lined from years of excess. But in his last hours in Vancouver, he laughed. "My whole body's shot to hell," he said. Then came the pour no one expected. Flynn turned serious and told his friend, "I've been pretending all my life. I was never a hero. I was scared I'd be nothing without the lies." It was a confession years in the making. He admitted he had never known who he really was beyond the roles: Robin Hood, the charming rogue, the lover. He called his fame the biggest performance of my life. For the first time, he didn't sound proud, he sounded tired. He said Hollywood had taken everything from him, including his peace. I wanted to live, he murmured, not just exist on camera. Moments later, his heart stopped. The newspapers wrote about his scandals, his charm, his women, but no one printed his final words. The truth was simple. Behind the hero mask, Errol Flynn died. Just like any man, broken, honest, and finally free. 8. Marilyn Monroe. On August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe's voice trembled with exhaustion as she spoke to her friend on the phone. "I'm tired of being a thing, not a person," she said. That was her final confession and the purest truth she ever spoke. For years, she'd been Hollywood's dream girl, the fantasy everyone wanted but no one cared to understand. She had beauty, fame, and money, yet felt invisible in her own life. Marilyn revealed that every smile she gave the camera was an act of survival. "They made me into something I can't live up to," she said earlier that week. "They only love me when I'm pretending." That night, she spoke about her fear of being forgotten, but even deeper, her fear of never being known for her mind, her thoughts, her real self. She told her therapist she was ready to escape the prison of her image. Hours later, she was found lifeless, clutching a phone. Some said it was suicide, others whispered conspiracy, but her confession told the truth. She wasn't just tired of life. She was tired of the performance. Marilyn Monroe didn't die from drugs, she died from being misunderstood. And in her final breath, she was finally real. 7. Montgomery Clift. By the time Montgomery Clift reached his final night, Hollywood had already forgotten him. Once praised as a genius, he had become a ghost, isolated, scarred, and tormented by his own reflection. After his devastating car crash, Clift was never the same. Painkillers, alcohol, and guilt consumed him. On the last evening, his housekeeper asked if he wanted to watch one of his old films. "No," he said quietly. "It hurts." That was his confession, and it spoke volumes. He couldn't bear to see the man he once was. Handsome, fearless, alive. He told a friend days before that fame had been his punishment, not his reward. "They think they know me," he said, "but I don't even know myself anymore." Clift's final years were filled with silence, no interviews, no premieres, just a man hiding from the image that made him. Hours before his death, he admitted he had spent his entire career trying to please others and forgot how to live for himself. His heart stopped in his sleep that night. The police report called it natural causes, but one writer later described it perfectly. It was the longest suicide in Hollywood history. Montgomery Clift's last confession wasn't about regret, it was about identity. He didn't die of tragedy. He died searching for the real man behind the mirror. 6. Marlon Brando. In the final years of his life, Marlon Brando became a recluse, a man who once owned Hollywood, now hidden in the shadows of his own mansion. Near the end, his body was failing, but his mind was sharper than ever. In a rare conversation with a close friend, Brando made a confession that sounded less like guilt and more like a warning. "Fame," he said, "is the most dangerous drug of all. It gives you everything and leaves you nothing." Brando admitted that he had destroyed every meaningful relationship he'd ever had, lovers, friends, even his children. "I kept everyone out," he said. "I thought I was protecting myself. I was just building my own prison." He spoke about his regrets as a father, how his emotional distance and temper had left his kids broken. In his final hours, Brando reportedly whispered, "None of it matters, the Oscars, the applause, the women. None of it fills the silence." He had lived like a god in an industry that worshipped him, yet he died like a monk stripped of illusion. His last act wasn't dramatic, just honest. "I wasted my life chasing approval," he said softly, "and I never approved of myself." Those were the words of a man who had finally stopped performing too late for the world, but just in time for himself. 5. James Dean. James Dean never got to grow old, but what he confessed before his fatal crash at age 24 revealed a young man who already saw death coming. In the weeks before that wreck, Dean had told his friend Dennis Hopper, "I know I'm not going to live long. I can feel it." It wasn't teenage melodrama, it was instinct. On the morning of his death, Dean spoke about how Hollywood had made him restless. "They don't want me," he said. "They want the idea of me." He confessed he felt trapped between being a serious actor and being turned into a symbol, the rebel everyone projected their pain onto. "I'm scared," he admitted, "because I don't know who I am off screen." As he drove his silver Porsche 550 Spider, the car he nicknamed Little Bastard, he told his mechanic, "People say live fast, die young. I just don't want to die stupid." Hours later, his car collided head-on with another vehicle. Witnesses said he was alive for a few minutes, barely conscious, mumbling something they couldn't understand. But one paramedic claimed Dean's last words were chillingly simple: "That guy's got to see me." To this day, no one knows what he meant. But maybe it was the truth that he'd spent his life trying to be seen, and in his final breath, he finally was. 4. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor's confession wasn't whispered in panic. It was spoken with calm, almost royal grace. Near the end, when her health was failing, she told her closest friend, "I was loved by millions, but I only ever wanted one love to last." Despite her 8 marriages, Taylor admitted she'd never truly found the peace she searched for. "I kept trying to fill the emptiness," she said, "but I never found home." She spoke openly about her guilt, not toward fame or fortune, but toward herself. She had lived for passion, drama, beauty, everything Hollywood taught her mattered. But in her last years, she realized none of it did. "I was always afraid of being ordinary," she said. "I wish I had just learned to be still." Taylor also confessed that she envied those who could live quietly, without cameras, without gossip. She said she'd give up all her diamonds for one day without pretending. Those words weren't bitterness. They were relief. As she drifted in and out of consciousness near the end, she smiled and said to her son, "I finally understand what love is, and it's not what I thought." Minutes later, she was gone. Elizabeth Taylor's final confession wasn't about fame or regret. It was about finally realizing that the most beautiful thing she'd ever lost was herself. 3. Richard Burton. Richard Burton lived and died in contradiction, a brilliant actor who despised fame, a romantic who destroyed every love he touched. But his final confession came not on stage, but in a quiet hospital room in Geneva. He asked to see a letter, one written years earlier by Elizabeth Taylor. After reading it, he whispered, "She was the only one who ever really knew me." Burton's last days were filled with reflection. He told a nurse that he had wasted his life chasing everything but peace. "I drank because it silenced me," he said. "And when it stopped working, I had nothing left." He admitted he'd been jealous of simpler men, men who didn't need applause to feel alive. He confessed that fame had been a parasite, feeding on his weaknesses and destroying what made him human. His career had made him rich, but also restless. "I thought I was immortal," he said, "until the mirror told me otherwise." In his final moments, he whispered that he wished he could apologize to Elizabeth, not for loving her too much, but for loving her wrong. His heart gave out hours later. Elizabeth Taylor, thousands of miles away, woke up from a dream that night and told her assistant, "Richard's gone." Their story ended, but his confession remained, that even legends die, longing for forgiveness. 2. Bette Davis. Bette Davis never played the victim, not on screen, not in life. But even Hollywood's fiercest woman had her moment of truth before death. In her final weeks, ravaged by cancer, she called her assistant close and said, "All my life I fought for control. I just never learned to surrender." She admitted that beneath the toughness was fear. Fear of being forgotten, replaced, outshined. "Every woman in this town fights age," she said. "I fought it with claws." Her confession was raw. She had been so consumed by ambition that she'd forgotten how to simply live. "I spent my whole life performing," she said. "Now I don't know who's left when the curtain falls." In her final hours, Davis refused morphine. She wanted to face the end clear-headed, not numb. "If I've got to die," she said, "I want to see it coming." Those around her recalled how her eyes, still fierce, still commanding, softened when she whispered, "Tell them I wasn't always tough. I was just scared." For the first time, Bette Davis wasn't acting. She was human. And in that moment, the woman who built her empire on control finally did the one thing she never could before she let go. 1. Charlie Chaplin. On Christmas Day 1977, the world's greatest silent comedian died with a whisper. But before that silence, Charlie Chaplin made one last confession, not of sin, but of truth. "I always pretended to make them laugh," he told his wife Una, "but I was just trying to keep from crying." Chaplin had brought joy to millions through his tramp character, but he confessed that he had lived a deeply lonely life. "They laughed at the man with the cane," he said, "but they never knew how broken he was inside." After being exiled from America and betrayed by the same industry he helped build, Chaplin lived in Switzerland, far from the spotlight. There, as his body weakened, he he admitted that laughter had become his armor, a way to survive heartbreak, politics, and pain. He told Una, "I've spent my life chasing perfection in art, but what I wanted most was peace." Hours before his death, he smiled faintly and said, "I hope they remember the man, not the clown." That was his final wish. When the world learned of his passing, headlines called him the man who made the world laugh. But his confession revealed something deeper, that the man who gave laughter to humanity never truly found it for himself.